Right at this moment in time, we have the unique opportunity where there's so much noise to listen to what the Spirit is truly saying. Everything is changing at a fast rate. There is already a generation redefining the world that they want to live in. And we have an exciting opportunity, our Baptist DNA of radical dissent. I love that. Radical dissent gives us a unique opportunity. As disciples of Jesus, our distinctions individually and as churches and communities all reveal the unlimited beauty of a God who is the rich source of all of us. And so we need to learn to build that bigger table. Building a bigger table is not easy. Sometimes it's difficult. And so one of the things that I'm aiming to do is to share the stories of where building a bigger table is happening. And as any true millennial, you can follow me on all of my social media handles there in order to keep up to date and share some of those stories. And if you can just scan the QR code in, which will give you the links to all of them. Building a bigger table is exciting because I think it gets right to the heart of Jesus's ministry. What strikes me most in the Gospels is Jesus's table ministry. The way that he so casually and often shares a meal, the act of breaking bread, a way of letting people know that they were seen and heard and known. The table is an altar in which Jesus welcomed the world and with each other. We can so easily forget that faith is a relational experience. It's not transactional. It's almost impossible, I would say, to move in Christ-likeness without being able to extend compassion and mercy and love to those around us. I want to share with you two examples of Jesus's table ministry. The first is one where Jesus gathers with priests and prostitutes and other religious elite and the common street rabble, with his disciples and his adversaries. How many of us, let's just think about this, are willing to gather those who dislike, oppose, or displease us? How many of us actively seek out those who we perceive to be our enemies and invite them to a meal? There at this massive table of all sorts of people, Jesus treats them all with dignity and respect. And they're all they all leave Jesus's presence with their dignity intact, even when Jesus has harsh words for them. In Jesus's time, the act of sharing a meal with someone was an act of respect, association with another, willingness to be in fellowship. It was almost like a public endorsement. And because of this, in Luke 15, there's a diverse group of people that Jesus chooses to share a meal with, and it makes other people angry. The religious elite were quoted as saying several times, "Look at him being Jesus. This man eats with sinners." Now, while we don't see it mentioned in the Bible, I imagine, and please forgive me for any heresy, but I imagine the street people often communicated a criticism of Jesus for breaking bread with the religious elite, accusing him of conspiring with their oppressors or contributing to their marginalization. You see, there's a tension that Jesus was living in of the religious elite and those that weren't in on the party. And that tension is the same tension that we are called to live in, where we are seeking to create a conversation where there's been silence, a wanting of claiming of ownership over grace. Jesus didn't just meet with those who could further his cause or boost his platform. He had mates in the lowest of places too. And there was this kind of strategic beauty of Jesus's scandalous, diverse guest list where he was around. He wasn't being selective. Jesus affirmed and valued everyone who came. In a world where we're so often contented to just hang out with those who are like us, Jesus models something different. He fully engages all different sorts of people and teaches them about one another in the process. For him, the table seems to be a tool of connection. The table transcends these differences. It bridges disagreements. It declares that the other person is welcome and worthy to be heard. That's the heart of the gospel. And then, of course, we see in John 13, the other very famous table that Jesus shares. This is one final time, gathering his closest mates together. He gets up from the table, he wraps a towel round his waist, he assumes a servant's position and washes their feet. It's a gesture of humility, unexpected because it was way below his social standing. What I find fascinating, though, is the writer tells us that Judas is at that meal. The disciple who would soon betray Jesus. For me, this makes Jesus's act of service all the more radical, all the more inclusive. It's this counterintuitive kindness. He extends hospitality ultimately to the one who becomes his enemy. This gesture is a living parable for us. As churches, we should be foot washers, not just to those that we deem worthy or who are like us, but those who offend us, to those that we're angered by, to those that we disagree with, those that we are least inclined to welcome. I believe this kind of lavish acceptance is what the world is craving. And sometimes, if we're honest, it's something that the church is giving less and less. Jesus's kind of hospitality, though, is different to social entertaining. And let me, please, I can't hone that in enough. This isn't just having a meal for a meal's sake. Jesus's kind of hospitality is transformative for both the guest and the host. When we are fully welcomed, we're able to find rest in the presence of others, not needing to earn or achieve or do anything. We no longer feel compelled to prove our worth. We can simply relax in other people's company. And in following Jesus' example, the church can begin to extend that table by providing that kind of hospitality. When people access our churches and missional communities, are they relaxing in each other's company? And it's to that backdrop of radical hospitality that I believe small churches have a vital part to play in the post-lockdown church. As leaders, we've had to deal with lots of different approaches and manage the expectations of our congregations. But I believe there are some key lessons here as we move forward that small churches can lead a way in. We have an opportunity to seize the moments. As Baptists, forgive me, I know this is being recorded. Sometimes we've had an over-reliance on process and how things are done. We can create a culture in which our churches and missional communities need to step out of that. And I want to encourage you. I know many people are back in their buildings already, but I want to encourage you not to rush back into a building, actually. I want to encourage you not to rush back into starting the ministries. Why? Because actually, I don't think God's fully stopped speaking yet. I don't think we've fully heard what God has had to say to us in this time. We can seize the moment to pause and listen. We can learn at this time to be flexible in seizing God's momentum. There's this understated assumption that there is a new normal. I don't see that, actually. I don't feel that in my spirit. We are living in a world that is ever changing. To think there is a new normal or a new set pattern of one way of doing things, I think is a little naive. Therefore, rather than starting from a mindset of how do we get through this, I wonder if we can start as small churches with an expectation that change is constant and what opportunities come from that. Change is constant. What opportunities come from that? We also have the ability to focus, allocating time, energy, and resources into getting to know our churches and people in our churches is of highest importance. Small churches have the ability to communicate far more effectively than other communities, because there's already an establishment of relationship there. And I wonder, one of the dangers when we have well-established communities is allowing the focus of that community to be outward looking. It's really challenging, isn't it, when everyone knows each other and is comfortable to have a different focus of where we go out from there. But we have an opportunity, as whatever the next few months hold in particular, of actually modeling something that starts small but embraces lots of people. I wonder if we can communicate the priorities of favouring others better in a smaller context. And the other thing I think I want to encourage you on is to have courage. We live in this disrupted church life, and therefore risk-taking is essential. One of my favourite films is Toy Story. And I don't have a preference. I like all four of them. They're wonderful. But the first one, there's this scene, and forgive me if you've seen it, and also forgive me if I just go into fandom and talk about this for far too long. But there is a scene where they're trying to get back into Andy's car. Andy's their owner. And before this, at the very start of the film, Buzz doesn't think he's a toy. He thinks he's a space ranger. And so he thinks he can fly. And Woody says to him, that's not flying, that's just falling with style. And then when they come to this point in the film, they're trying to get back into the car. And Buzz has got a rocket on his back. I'd encourage you to watch it. It's a great film. And they're trying to get into this car. And there they are flying in the air. And Woody looks and he goes, Buzz, you're flying. And Buzz says, this isn't flying, this is falling with style. Often in church life, we can feel like we're falling. Often we can't get people to fill the rotas, or we're risk assessment at the moment under. It can feel like we're falling. But believe me, friends, you have been falling with style. There's an art and a beauty to allowing ourselves to fall and God's Spirit to grab a hold of us. Sometimes we need to not fear the falling, but trust that God will sweep us up in it. The fear of failure destroys creativity. We have been creative over the past 18 months. We've had to get creative. And what I want to encourage you to do as smaller churches is embrace that same courageous nature that we've had in resourcing our churches, into resourcing our communities to build back a bigger table. And of course, the one thing that we will need is that empathy and compassion in that. I believe this is the most powerful thing that we can offer our communities. It's at the heart of radical hospitality. Now, technology plays a very key role in our lives, but we really need to embrace the human connection as well in the usage of technology. It's really interesting that the one thing that broke my heart with COVID-19, sorry, there's lots of things that broke my heart with COVID-19 and the start of the pandemic. But when they said churches could close, I wasn't that fussed, actually. I was a little bit excited by that. What broke my heart was I couldn't share a meal with my friends anymore. I live on my own. I'm very happy on my own. I don't need sympathy. But as someone who lived on their own, I went nearly 10 months without physically seeing another person or sharing a meal with them. I wonder how many people in our communities did the same. Now, don't get me wrong, churches did an amazing job. Communities went out, made sure people had, people to see, people to phone. But there's something unique and beautiful about sharing a meal, for all the reasons I've outlined before. And therefore, what we need to do is look at, actually, rather than at this time focusing on the programs or the things to do or the phone round rota, actually, can we just focus on eating together, being together, relaxing in each other's hospitality? Because actually that was the chosen method that Jesus used to challenge the status quo, to include more people, to represent a diversity of values. I wonder if we could do the same. And let's be honest, Jesus was open. He was open to establishing a different moral code. And it created some tensions. But we shouldn't shy away from that. What we should do is embrace those tensions with empathy and compassion. Radical hospitality continues to make room for all. Those that aren't yet represented, not yet welcomed. I wonder if we were to look around our communities, whose voices are we not hearing? I think when people, back in the day, do you remember when we all went out to clap the NHS? I think Jesus' heart was for those that didn't come out and clap, those doors that remained closed. Jesus went out to seek those that were not represented in a community. Do we do the same? And Jesus even goes further than that, doesn't he? Because at his very last meal, he made room for Judas. And I don't mean this disrespectfully, but when we were excited to get back into our church buildings, who was in the forefront of our mind? The people we already knew? Or the people we didn't know and the people we didn't like? Who would have been at the forefront of Jesus's mind? If in Jesus's last meal, he makes room for ultimately someone who will betray him, who are we making room for when we eat together as well? And I want to encourage you that as you grapple with the uncertainty of all that church life offers in your context, not to get stuck into a linear thinking, but instead explore the multiple ways of extending God's kingdom. And extending God's kingdom looks different for every one of us, but we must extend it. And so what I want us to do is, I'm ahead of time, which never happens. So you can tell I'm out of the habit of preaching. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to encourage us to pause just for a moment, just to think, who's not represented in our communities? Just to think about ways in which we can extend the kingdom. And I know you're at home, so the email box is flashing, your phones are there, but please humour me just for a second and ignore those and try and focus in What would God say to you about extending his kingdom? Let's pause. I wonder what came into our minds, what we were thinking of. We will explore later on what it looks like to be a good Samaritan, a good neighbour. But what I would like us to do, we're 10 minutes ahead of schedule, so I think that's a blessing of time. So what I'd like to do is give you, I'm going to give you like 30 minutes. Now, I know in breakout rooms that feels like a very long time, but embrace it, get to know each other, share your context, and then look at together, what does building a bigger table look like for us? Now, you can take two approaches to that question. You can theorize about it, or you can localize it. I challenge you to really try and localize it. What does building a bigger table with Jesus's hospitality look like in your context? And if you've got time, maybe explore together what you need to put in place to facilitate that happening.